Right. Welcome to the GRadulting Workshop Series. My name is Debbie McCutsky, and I'm the Coordinator of Services and Programs for Graduate Student Legal Aid. I use she, her pronouns. Our topic today is all about how to handle police encounters. This is our last workshop of the semester, but we will be having several new workshops in the spring semester, and we hope to see you there. So, before we start the presentation, I want to make sure that you all know about legal aid. And there are actually two legal aid offices on campus, one for grad students and another for undergrads. And while the offices are separate, we do work closely together because we want to provide the best possible services to our students. So, in fact, both offices are co-sponsoring today's workshop. So, what does legal aid do? In addition to workshops like this, we support students who need help with legal issues, like tenant-landlord problems, car accidents, traffic tickets. We help students with legal issues that pertain to immigration. In fact, we have several appointments open on December 6th. You can visit both of our websites, and I will put that link in the chat, so you can find out more about immigration consultations and how to sign up. We help students who've been charged by the university. We have notaries on staff. And if you paid your student fee, and I'm sure you did, then you've already paid for our services. There's no additional charge. So information about who we are and what we do is on our website. I will also put a link to that in the chat. So, a bit of housekeeping. Automatic closed captioning has been enabled if you want to follow along. Near the end of the workshop, we'll post a link to an evaluation because we need your feedback. We want to know, is this workshop helpful? Do you have suggestions, criticisms, compliments? We want to hear it all. We will email links to the survey, the slides, and the recording to everyone who registered. The links will also be posted on our website. And of course, we welcome your questions and comments throughout today's workshop. Just use the chat feature for that. I am pleased to introduce our speaker, attorney Zach Mundy. Zach has served as the attorney and director for Graduate Student Legal Aid for the past 5 years. I also want to recognize Syndy Shilling. Syndy is the director and attorney for Undergraduate Student Legal Aid. She's been on staff for 10 years, and Syndy will be contributing to the discussion today. So Zach, take it away.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Syndy, for being here. Thank you for those who are here in person today and those who are watching in the future. We're going to talk about police encounters today. There are numerous different types of police encounters that people or students like yourselves may face. We're going to talk about some of the most common and try to answer any questions that you have about what you should do if you have an encounter with the police in different circumstances. Oh no, there we go. We're going to just start with the basics. Some of the common ones that we have been asked about in the past are traffic stops are usually number one when you have an interaction with the police. Then there's sort of general questioning by the police that can be taking place during an arrest or also during a traffic stop, or maybe you're stopped on the street. We're going to talk about what to do when you're arrested or being detained. And then we also commonly get questions about your right to record the police as a bystander, or if you're taking part in a protest. So we're going to touch on that as well. The basics of interactions with police. I guess we'll give the preface with the police have a reputation to not always know what they're supposed to do. Many officers do and act courteous to you, but some of them don't. Despite which officer you may interact with on any given day, whether it is one who is treating you respectfully or one who may not be, it is in your best interest to be polite. Officers have a lot of discretion in their interactions with you, whether it's to issue you a warning or issue you a ticket, whether it's to arrest you or not. And so the best way to make the outcome the best possible for you is to be respectful in the moment, to be polite, to be courteous, and make sure you're not disrespectful, because if you are, usually their discretion will go in the way of making your life a little bit more difficult. And so we want to try to avoid that, even in the face of a disrespectful officer who you're interacting with. In a similar vein, you want to make sure that you don't panic. This can be a very stressful situation depending on the circumstances, or even if it's a minor interaction. There have been incidents that escalate very quickly, that police often escalate very quickly and unreasonably. And so it's in your best interest to try to remain calm so that you can think as clearly as possible. You want to make sure that you're not going to make any mistakes, that you're not going to suddenly run away because your emotions have made you so scared. You're not going to lie to the police, give them a fake name. If you try to remain calm, usually you can avoid those mistakes that are going to lead to bigger trouble later on. We also recommend that you never resist a police officer. There, as we know, have been many instances across our country where police officers may issue an improper order, they may violate your rights, but now is not the time. In the moment with your interaction with that police officer is not the time to argue. It's not the time to try to change their mind. What you should do in that moment is do your best to remember everything that's taking place, to then immediately document the encounter after the incident, and to file a complaint later. If you have questions about how to file that complaint, and that's going to be largely dependent on the type of complaint it is, if it's someone that's just disrespectful to you and yells at you versus someone that is physically assaulting you, there's going to be different types of complaints that you would file. But that's what we're here for. The Student Legal Services, both Syndy and myself, are here to try to answer those questions for you. But even if the officer is acting illegally, is violating your rights, resisting that officer will almost always lead to more trouble for you down the line, and probably more trouble for you in the moment as well. So you want to do your best to remain calm, not panic, and not resist the officer physically, because it's just going to cause problems in the long run, which we're trying to avoid. Traffic stops. The most common complaint or interaction that students, at least on the graduate side, deal with and I believe probably on the undergrad side, deal with police, is a traffic stop. The common question we get is, when can the police pull me over? The sort of federal standard is that they have to have a reasonable suspicion based on specific articulable facts that a crime has occurred. Sometimes it's really easy when they're to have that reasonable suspicion, like they have their radar gun out and you were speeding. The radar gun says you were going too fast. Maybe the radar gun's not calibrated properly. That's an issue for another day, but that at least gives them that reasonable suspicion, and those specific articulable facts that they can talk about are, the radar gun said they were going over the speed limit, and so I decided to pull them over. In other cases, when you're driving, it could be a little bit more ambiguous or more of a gray area. If they were choosing to pursue a reckless driving charge against you, or possibly pull you over because they believe that you're driving under the influence of alcohol. In those circumstances, they need to be able to articulate, to be able to explain with words the reason why they pulled you over. And so it could be that it appeared that you were swerving in and out of a lane, that you were driving erratically, which is often swerving, but that's a phrase that you hear police officers use a lot, that you were driving erratically. And so that could be the specific fact that they are using to provide them a reasonable suspicion that you have violated a traffic law. Once you are pulled over, in most cases, if it's just a speeding ticket or something along those lines, the police won't ask to search your car. In some cases, they will, if they believe that it's suspicion of you driving under the influence of alcohol. They often will sort of ask more questions to you. If they ask you to search your car, you should always say, no, I do not consent to you searching my vehicle. Again, we want to remember sort of the basic tips. We want to do it politely. We don't want to yell at them. We don't want to sort of threaten them and say, I do not consent, and my cousin's an attorney, or I'm going to sue you, or any of those things that might escalate the situation. But just calmly say, no, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. In the case of a vehicle, you have less rights and less protections than you do if it were your house. So they can still search anyway without your consent, but as long as you have voiced your opposition and telling them you do not consent, you may be able to fight the search later on, because there are specific standards that they have to be able to conduct that search. And again, now in the moment is not the time to do that argument and not the time to lodge your complaint. You can do that later, whether it's through a sort of a internal affairs type of complaint through the police department itself, or whether it would be through a lawsuit. But in either circumstance, you should always say no, you don't consent to them searching your vehicle. You and your passengers also have a right to remain silent. You do have to provide your identification to the officer. You can be arrested if you do not, if they ask you for your name. But other than your name and date of birth, there's nothing else that you have to provide to the officer, or your registration as well, which is part of being pulled over for a traffic stop. You don't have to answer any other questions that could incriminate you. And we always advise that you lean towards being silent in the moment. Just be courteous, and you can say that you don't want to answer the question. So what should you do once you are in the car and you see the lights and sirens behind you? You just want to stop the car in a safe place as quickly as possible. You want to find the closest shoulder. You want to make sure that you're using your blinker when you get over, so that the officer doesn't try to tack on another charge of you not signaling properly as you change lanes. If you can find a safe place quickly, then you should do so and quickly pull over to the side of the road. Don't just immediately stop in the middle of the lane where you are. Do your best to not impede the flow of traffic. Once you pull over, you want to turn off the engine to your vehicle. You want to turn off any music that you have on the inside. It is usually helpful to turn on your internal light and to roll down your window partway. And when the officer approaches, again, just so that you're making sure that you're not giving them any reason to do something that they shouldn't do, you want to place your hands on the steering wheel as they approach, so that they don't think that you're trying to hide something, so that they don't think that you are holding a weapon of any sort. We know that none of you are going to be in that circumstance where you're doing that, but we don't want the police to be able to say, oh, I had a reasonable fear. So it's the best to have the light on, the internal light on, so they can see inside, see what you're doing, as well as placing your hands on the wheel. When you are requested, which they 9 times out of 10 are going to request, a copy of your license, registration, and proof of insurance. Those are things that you can be cited for as well if you do not provide them. And so providing that documentation is in your best interest. It's usually best to keep that information handy in your car, so that if you can wait until you are requested to do it, and do it when they tell you. So whether that's in a glove box, whether that's in the compartment in between the passenger seat and the driver's seat, make it in a place where you can easily reach it without looking like you're reaching for something else. If you have passengers, yeah, Syndy, go ahead.
One thing that I would add here, and I know from personal experience because of my college-age son, he got pulled over in Louisiana, and the cop was very angry when he could not produce hard copies of each of those things. In other words, he had them on his phone, but a cop doesn't want you sitting, scrolling, trying to find the picture. And my son produced the picture, but the cop still cited him for not having a paper copy. So just have those things right there in the glove box, all together, paper clipped or whatever, so that you can very quickly pull out, because you don't want to test an officer's patience. Some are going to be more patient than others, but just assume the worst and have it ready to go in hard copy.
Yeah, that's a great point that I didn't think about, because I assumed that everybody would have them printed out, but I know that's not the case anymore. And so I think especially for the proof of insurance, that a lot of people are just going to have their, their Geico app, their Allstate app, and try to just present that to the officer. But you should print all of those documents out, even if they didn't send you a formal sort of printed out copy in the mail. Take a screenshot from your phone and print it out ahead of time and put it in your glove box, so that you can provide them that copy. Because in most circumstances, the officer is then going to take that information from you and return to their vehicle so that they can input it into the system to make sure there's not any warrants out for your arrest, to make sure this isn't a stolen vehicle, all of those sorts of things. And the last thing you want to do is give them your phone and have them take your phone with you, because now that you've unlocked it, who knows what they're going to look at, and we don't want them to do that. So making sure that you have your physical driver's license, your registration, and then make sure that you have your proof of insurance printed out. I know at least in Maryland, they're still mailing you a paper copy of your registration, but I'm not certain about every other state. But if your vehicle is titled and registered in another state that has sort of converted to electronic files, or maybe they have an app that you do it on, then we would definitely recommend that you print that out and have printed copies of your registration and proof of insurance, so that you don't have that same problem where officers can be unreasonable, they can act irrationally, and you don't want to give them a reason to be annoyed at you when you can control it on the front end. That was a great point, Syndy. Thank you. And so, if you're a passenger in a similar suit to the driver, just make sure that you're sitting there calmly, not moving around, not trying to hide things. Put your hands on the dashboard, or keep them just visibly folded in your lap. Make sure that you're avoiding any sudden movements and keeping your hands where the officer can see them. Officers are trained for the worst case scenario. So they're trained for how to react if people do actually have weapons and want to attack the officer. We know that you're not going to do that. And so we want you to sort of make sure that you're conveying to the officer that this is a safe space for them. Because again, they may act irrationally, and we want to not give them any reason to do that. What not to do. After you receive your citation, they will ask you to sign it. Signing a traffic ticket, and really signing any citation in Maryland, is not an admission of guilt. It is something that you are required to do to acknowledge that this took place. If you refuse to sign the ticket, they can arrest you and detain you, which you don't want to do. It's going to be more of a hassle for you. It's going to cost you more money. And so the best thing you can do is to just politely sign the ticket, and then you're going to contest that later if you believe that you were improperly cited. The ticket itself will provide a lot of information as to how to file that complaint and how to contest it, or at least how to contest that ticket. But if you have questions, that's what Syndy and I are here for. That we can tell you what you should do, make sure that you're meeting the deadlines, which is usually 30 days for a traffic ticket to make sure you mail in to contest, but make sure you're doing everything the right way, and help explain the process to you, how to prepare for your court date and all that sort of stuff. Some people might want to start searching for their license and registration immediately when you get pulled over. And if it's something where you are not sure where it is, it's better to wait for the police and make sure that you are waiting for their instruction for you to do so. It can also be helpful if you believe the police officer is acting in sort of an aggravated way, or creating a lot of tension in a situation. It's often in your best interest to articulate, to state exactly what you're doing at that time. When your officer says, please give your license and registration and proof of insurance, to say, yes, yes, officer, my license is in my wallet, which is in my back pocket, and so I'm going to get it out of my back pocket, and then I need to lean over to the glove compartment to get my registration and proof of insurance. If you can say those things out loud while you're doing it, it will usually help the officer remain informed and hopefully calm, so that they don't escalate the situation unnecessarily. Similar as before, we don't want to antagonize or disrespect the officer. We don't want to yell at them and tell them that they had no reason to pull you over, because even if they didn't, even if you're in the right, it's very difficult to change an officer's mind in the moment. And usually the best way to do that is through being polite and showing them that you, at least acting as though you respect the officer in the moment, and making sure that you're not adding any additional potential violations by resisting the officer, or anything along those lines. As we mentioned earlier, don't play music loudly when the police are walking up to your car. You should turn the music off completely. You should, if you have other passengers in the car, you should ask them to remain quiet in the moment and not sort of continue conversations that are unrelated to this, or make anyone else feel like they're going to panic or more stressed. Also, there are many different cultures around the world where different police stops can be different fines or violations can be paid directly to the police officer in the moment, or something along those lines. If you get pulled over in the US, that is never going to be the case. You're not going to be paying the police officer in that moment, and so never offer the police any money, whether it is because you're trying to convince them not to give you a ticket, or because you think you just want to pay the ticket right then, because that can also, in some cases, be twisted against you and said that you are trying to bribe the police officer. So you never want to offer the officer money or anything along those lines in the moment. Just remain calm, identify yourself, provide your information, and then know that you'll have the opportunity to contest the ticket later on, or file a complaint if it escalates to something further.
And Zach, I would also add that in the moment, the police officer might say certain things about how you can handle your citation. So I always have undergrad students telling me, well, the officer said I could just pay this and be done with it. Not to the officer, but to the court. And in some cases, that's true. There are offenses that we call must appear offenses, meaning you don't have the option just to pay the court and be done with it. You have to show up for a hearing. An example of that is like a DUI, driving under the influence. You don't have an option to just pay a fine. But other smaller offenses, you may be able to just pay the fine. I would say, though, the officer's not there to give you legal advice. There are many good reasons for not paying a fine right away and going to court to challenge it. Even if you think you're guilty of whatever you've been accused of, there are some other dispositions that you can get from a court that will keep it off your record or allow you to get it off of your record sooner. So always come to us regardless of what an officer has told you, because you will have some other options. And then I forget what the other one. Oh, I was just going to kind of address the first question in the chat, which is a good one, because we're talking about it right now. How do we not panic? You know, it's easy to say just calm down or just relax. I get that a lot of people in this situation, I'm a lawyer, I still get nervous if I'm pulled over for a ticket. So that's very natural. I think what we're saying is, at least externally, behave in a way that is not based on panic, so that the officer, I think our overarching advice is you want to do everything you can to keep this a courteous interaction and a calm interaction. So to the extent that everybody's different about how they calm themselves down, but to the extent that you can keep focused on looking ahead, listening to everything that the officer is saying, responding only to the necessary questions and not just, screaming and crying or, going into hysterics. Whatever the way that you can do that is the best way to show the officer that this is going to be a routine traffic stop. There's not going to be any ugliness or nastiness. So again, different strategies are going to work for different people, but you want to appear to the officer as being rational, able to listen and take direction, and get this over as quickly as possible so you can get into one of our offices and talk about what your options are. So I know it's easy to say just calm down, but to the extent that you can stay focused on what's happening right in front of you and listening to the officer and answering the questions that you need to answer, it's going to look different for everybody, but we're just trying to minimize any reason that interaction might escalate, if that makes sense. And then I know there's a couple of other questions in the chat, and we'll get to those in a few minutes.
Yeah, and just to touch on, like, anytime you have an interaction with the police, almost every time, it's going to be an emotional experience, because your mind is going to start racing. You're going to start thinking about the consequences, even if the consequences are small, right? Like, even if you're paying a speeding ticket that's $100, I know I was super broke when I was in graduate school, and I would have been like, okay, now I have to, I'm like budgeting my next month with $100 less in my budget. And that is stressful. That is totally stressful. But I think, sort of, as Syndy phrased it, the best thing you can do is just to try to focus on the here and now and just not let the potential consequences overwhelm you in the moment. You can just try to focus on what is the officer saying. It's okay to also like have those emotions, and as she said, try to outwardly convey that you're not overwhelmed. But if you are overwhelmed in the moment and you didn't understand what the officer said, it's okay to say, I'm sorry, could you say that again? Like to just like ask for that courtesy to try to get that. Now, obviously, there's also a whole wide variety of police interactions that we're talking here, and like a traffic stop for going 10 miles over the speed limit, that may be more effective advice as opposed to I'm at a protest and I'm in handcuffs right now and they are arresting me and dragging me into a police wagon, where I doubt there's a single person in the entire world who can just calm down or just relax, right? Like that is certainly something where it will take a sort of abstract removal of yourself from sort of you being pushed around and handcuffed and detained to think, how do I remain calm in this moment? And all you can do is do your best. And so that's why you can sort of, if you're at the more severe end of the spectrum and you're getting arrested or you're being physically detained, maybe you're just being held momentarily and they haven't decided whether they're going to arrest you, but they're putting you in handcuffs. All we ask you to continue to focus on is what's going on in this moment so that I can try to answer the questions concisely and succinctly. Try to sort of make mental notes within your head, because if this is happening improperly, you're going to want to document that and try to in your head know what is happening A to B to C to D, so that right after this is finished, I can write down my experience with as many details as possible. And trying to also just remember that any interaction you have with the police, you are rarely ever going to be able to fix the problem in that moment. And so you just want to think, there may be consequences here. I maybe made a mistake, maybe I didn't, and they are improperly detaining me. Maybe they're violating my rights. But the best thing that I can do right now is to be silent. The best thing that I can do is to not outwardly overreact and start yelling at the police and trying to make the situation worse. And so sometimes if you're on that other end of the spectrum, or really just anything past the traffic stop, just saying be silent, be silent, be silent, be silent in your head will hopefully prevent the problems that the panic can set in, right? Like even though you are panicking internally, if you can just make sure that you can control yourself to the extent to just be silent and say, I am choosing to be silent. I would like to, I don't want to answer any questions without an attorney. These are sort of tips we're going to get to in the next few slides. Then those sorts of things can hopefully put you on the path to the best possible outcome in the situation you're currently in.
And I would, just to cap this off, I would say I've seen plenty of students where a routine traffic stop has escalated to being detained when it otherwise may not have resulted in that. And then even farther escalating to resisting arrest when someone tries to tell the police what they're doing wrong. And they may very well be doing something wrong, but as Zach said, that's not the time or the place to solve that. And talking back to the officer or telling him or her that they're violating your rights or resisting in any way usually simply escalates the situation. And now you're not dealing with a ticket for speeding. Now you're dealing with resisting arrest or a public disturbance or assaulting a police officer or what have you. So you just want to make sure, even if the police officer may not appear to want to keep this at the lowest level, that's always your goal. Let's keep this as short of an interaction and as pleasant an interaction as possible so it doesn't escalate to something that it didn't start as.
Yeah, and sometimes even if you're 100% correct on the underlying charge, if you then assault a police officer, they're going to be like, okay, we don't care about that initial charge, but you assaulted the police officer, and that's going to have much more serious consequences than whatever your traffic stop was, or usually at least the first interaction with the police. All right, police questioning, what should I do? When you are stopped by police, there are different levels, and there's hundreds of different cases, both federally and well as different states, that sort of define when they can stop you, how they can stop you, how long they can hold you, when you are formally detained and under arrest, when you're not. We don't have time to get into all those right now, but some of the basics to think about are, if you are being questioned by police, you do not have to answer any questions, and you may not even have to stand there and stay with them. You can ask, am I free to go? If they say yes, then you can leave the situation calmly. Maybe you are a bystander and maybe say that in some cases you were driving through College Park. One of your, the driver maybe is under the suspicion for intoxication, but all the passengers are just sitting around doing nothing, and the police are doing tests, trying to determine if that person is intoxicated. You can ask, am I free to go? And because I'm just a passenger, I didn't do anything wrong here. The police may let you leave in that moment. You can choose whether you want to leave, whether you want to remain and start recording to help your friend or the driver. But if they say yes, leave calmly. If they say no, you have a right to ask, why are they holding you? Why are they stopping you? Most police officers will tell you something. It may or may not be the actual reason, but beyond that, you can sort of just take that for what it is, and that will help you document mentally, try to make a record of what's taking place so that you can then figure out whether you have grounds for a complaint later on. We always recommend that you exercise your right to remain silent. It's as simple as saying, I want to remain silent. You can also just say no if they say, are you willing to answer questions? Something along those lines. Just be steadfast in, I want to remain silent. They cannot arrest you or detain you simply for refusing to answer questions. If they think you committed a crime in the first place, they can still arrest you or detain you for that underlying crime. But the fact that you have invoked your right to remain silent does not give them any grounds to arrest you or detain you. Make it clear that you do not agree to be searched. And this is similar to the traffic stop, but this could be for your person. Say, I do not consent to a search. They may search you anyway, but you should clearly state your opposition for the record. If you do waive your right, if you do provide consent, you're never going to be able to complain about it again. If you say, yes, you can search my vehicle, yes, you can search my person, then by providing them that permission, it's not something that you can later revoke. So you will have less protections going forward. So you want to make sure that you say, I do not consent to a search. If you're being detained, if you're being arrested, they're going to search you anyway. They're going to pat you down to make sure you don't have any weapons, but it's still important for you to clearly state your opposition to the search. Talking about the traffic stop again, if you're given a ticket, give your name, your date of birth, sign the ticket. If you refuse to sign the ticket, you may be arrested. Similar in that vein, in Maryland, it's different in every state, but in Maryland, if you get pulled over for drunk driving and you refuse to do a breathalyzer, you can also be detained for that. And so it is usually in your best interest to do a breathalyzer, because you can face additional charges, like there's the presumed suspension of your license if you refuse a breathalyzer. So something to think about. All right, when you are arrested, we're seeing a pattern here of things to say, things to remember. You should tell the police your name and your basic identifying information, but nothing else. Again, it's important to provide them your actual name, your actual date of birth. It's extremely unlikely that telling them a fake name will help you in any way, and it can provide additional grounds for them to charge you so that you can face additional consequences, whether it's fines or whether it's jail time, whether it's probation or one of those alternative pathways. But lying to the police about your name is not going to be a good idea. Again, we want you to repeat, I want to remain silent. I will not be answering questions at this time. I will only answer questions. I will only answer your questions with my attorney. I want to talk to a lawyer. You are entitled to have an attorney with you present when you're being questioned as a suspect in committing a crime. In most crimes, you can be provided an attorney if you're unable to afford one. And so if you have questions about any of those circumstances, let us know and we will answer them for you. We obviously are not sort of an emergency service. You can't call us when you're getting arrested at 11 p.m., but document as much as possible, write down exactly what happened after the fact, set up an appointment with us as soon as possible so that we can talk you through what your options may be and how to best respond to the charges that you're facing. You should also assume that the police are recording you at all times except when you're speaking privately with your attorney. And so that can be in the moment when you're getting arrested. There may be a body camera on the police. That can be while you were in the back of a squad car going to the police station, or even just in the back of the squad car, just sitting there, having a conversation with someone else who may be in the back of the squad car with you. Those sorts of things, assume that you're being recorded at all times, and don't try to, get your friend to coordinate a story that you're going to lie to the police to try to get out of this because they're going to have it on tape. More things. I want to remain silent. I want to talk to an attorney. Keep saying that. Things not to do. So we don't want you to provide additional explanations or excuses or stories. We don't want you to give them any additional information. It can all be used against you later on. If you are detained and you are able to make a phone call, if your phone call is not to an attorney, they can record your phone call. So be aware of that. If you're calling your family, you don't need to tell them, I did X, Y, and Z on the phone, so come get me out. You should say, I'm being detained. I need you to pick me up. I need you to bail me out. Don't talk about the details of the situation. And if you do, just talk about what the police are claiming. The police are claiming I did this, period. So I am in jail, or I am being detained. I need you to come pick me up. Don't provide additional details or explanations over the phone, because they may be recording your calls. And then if you, as many of us are wont to do, not always provide people in our family the exact story or the exact circumstances that led to this arrest. We may be changing some of the details, and if that is on record, we have lied to our family, and then we tell the police a different story later on, even if that other story is true, those contradictions and those inconsistencies could be used against us. If you are arrested and charged with a crime, do not make any decisions on your case without talking to an attorney. Depending on the seriousness of the crime you're charged with, maybe you can just talk with Syndy and I, but if it's an actual crime where you're facing jail time, then we're going to tell you that you need to get an attorney, whether it's a public defender or whether it's a private defense attorney that you hire, to talk to about not only sort of defending you in that case, but also strategizing the best way to respond to that case, or possibly pleading it down, or seeking lesser charges, or a whole number of options of sort of the alternative probation before judgments, and all the different things that may be available to you. But don't make any of those decisions without talking to an attorney. As Syndy stated earlier, the police are not your attorney. The police do not have your best interests at heart. They will tell you how they think things are, or they will tell you what they think you want to hear in some circumstances, or they may just blatantly lie to you. The police are allowed to lie to you in the US. They don't have to be honest. So you don't want to take their advice. You want to make sure you're talking to an attorney who has your best interests and can at least help you make an informed decision. You should also not discuss your citizenship or immigration status with the officer. It shouldn't be problematic in most cases, but in some cases, depending on what your status is, or if you're out of status, those are not things that you want to discuss at that time. It's something you want to consult an attorney and address in a strategic way and make informed decisions about. All right, bystanders and protests. We are sort of at a point now where there are lots of student protests across the country. And so when you are lawfully present in any public space is a space that is owned by the government, essentially. So that could be most sidewalks. Technically the campus counts as a public space, though university campuses do have additional restrictions as opposed to every public space in the state. But you do have a right to photograph anything that's in plain view, including the buildings, including police officers. On private property, the owner of the property may set the rules about photography or video. So if you are inside of a Target, they can tell you, no, you cannot record inside of a Target. They can set the rules on private property. That's not a public space, even though it is a space where you may be able to access without asking, express permission. But you're allowed to record, sort of skipping to the third bullet point. If you're videotaping, in most states now, you are allowed to audio record as well as sort of take video recordings. In Maryland, you can, there's not any problems. In some states, they have tried to say that audio recording still falls under sort of old wiretapping laws, and thus you should not be able to audio record the police. But in general, you will be protected if you're recording the police in interaction with police. Police officers may not confiscate or demand to view any photographs you've taken or any videos you've taken without a warrant, and they may not delete any of those under any circumstances. They may order you to stop certain activities if they believe you are interfering with law enforcement operations or interfering with the flow of traffic earlier. So say that you see someone pulled over, you believe they're being unlawfully detained, you want to help them, so you start recording. If you say, I'm going to go stand in the middle of the road so I can properly see the police officer walk up to the driver's side door, the police officer can order you out of the road so that you're not impeding the flow of traffic. Or similarly, you cannot sort of stand 2 feet away from the police officer and do the recording because they believe that you may be interfering with their ability to conduct their arrest or detainment. So you may have to stand 15 to 20 feet away. We would say follow the orders of the police, but you do have a right to continue recording that interaction as a bystander, or if you're at a protest, or even if you're not a bystander, if you are the one being detained, you can record, but in some circumstances, they may ask you to put your phone down if they are about to arrest you and want to see your hands and make sure your hands are empty for their safety. Those sorts of things they may ask you to do. If you are stopped or detained for taking photographs, similar as before, we want you to remain calm and not physically resist the police officer. They cannot detain you without reasonable suspicion that you have committed a crime, that you're in the process of committing a crime or about to commit a crime. And so similar as before for the police questioning, if you are stopped and for photographing or videoing police, you can ask them if you're free to leave. If the answer is yes, you can calmly walk away. If you want to continue recording the interaction, you would just say, walk a little bit further away. If you're only 5 feet away and they are telling you to stop, then remove yourself from the situation and record from further away. If you are detained, ask the officer what crime you are suspected of committing. You can gently and politely remind them that recording them is your right under the First Amendment, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that is just that you're not escalating the situation, that you're doing it politely, that you're just reminding them of your right to do so, and making sure that the situation doesn't get escalated, because that's what we're trying to avoid. Questions. Do you recommend recording police interactions? I think it depends on the nature of the interaction. If you are being pulled over and it is just for going 10 miles over the speed limit, there's usually not a lot that is going to be helpful from that interaction. But if you're trying to protect yourself from an officer who is unnecessarily or unreasonably or irrationally escalating the situation, recording can be helpful for that. As we mentioned before, if you have a way to record the situation record the interaction without having the phone in your hands, then that would be beneficial to try to make sure that the police officer knows what you have in your hands, doesn't think that you're moving around too much, or that that is the basis for them to escalate the situation rightly or wrongly. Do you need to memorize your attorney's phone number, or will I have access to my phone when detained? You usually will not have access to your phone when detained. Depending on how nice the officers are in this day and age when you are detained, They may be willing to tell you the phone number. If you're asking specifically for my attorney is this person, they may look it up for you. But if you can memorize it, then you should memorize it. And I think that at the end of the day, it really depends on the severity of the crime that you are dealing with. In most cases, you will certainly have the opportunity, if you're actually being detained for more than, the traffic stop itself, or more than an hour or two, then they're going to allow you to find that information and call the attorney if you have a specific attorney that you are hoping for. If not, you can ask if it is a more serious crime, you can ask to speak with a public defender for whenever your initial appearance in front of the commissioner is going to be. And then that public defender can usually help you. If you have another attorney that you know that you're going to hire, they can get you in contact with them. But if you're able to memorize your attorney's phone number, I don't have an attorney that I know that I would memorize their phone number to call in that situation. But if you have someone in mind, then yes, I think it could be helpful to do that. But I don't know if Syndy has any more insights into that one.
No, I would agree with that. And sometimes you can also contact a family member who then can contact the lawyer for you and say, get over to wherever you're being detained. But sure, if you have someone in mind, a close friend or family that you want to memorize that number, that gets us stuck. So all the better. I think our only other question we haven't answered is where they can find affordable legal help after graduation. We'll tackle that right at the end of the presentation because we can give you a couple resources.
Yeah, and this is sort of at the end of what we have prepared for sort of our common scenarios. And so do you want to touch on that, Syndy? And
yeah, I'm happy to. So particularly with criminal matters, I think Zach earlier referred to the use of public defenders. Public defenders may be available to you if there is jail time at issue. It just depends on the level of the crime, whether you're eligible. And then there's an application process where you basically have to submit an application to the public defender's office in the county where the case is happening. I'm referring to Maryland. Sometimes this is different in other states, but in Maryland, you submit an application. They review that application. It's not a real strict review. They're going to look at the crime that you've been charged with to make sure that the crime qualifies. And public defenders are great. They're some of the best lawyers in Prince George's County that I know. The problem is they're very busy. So they have caseloads that none of us could imagine. And sometimes they're not going to get to your case until a couple of days before they need to speak with you. So, when you hire a private attorney, some of them are billing by the hours, many of them are billing by the case, but their job is to be responsive to you. Public defender, they're going to do the best they can with the caseload that they have. Again, it's not because they're not good lawyers. They're just really overwhelmed and very busy. So that may be an available resource in criminal cases. I also want to point out that in Maryland, most, if not all, of the courthouses in each county have what we call self-help. And it's an office in the courthouse where there are attorneys or other professional staff there on a daily basis or reachable by phone or Zoom. And especially in family-related cases, restraining orders, any of that kind of stuff, those self-help offices are really good. They have all the forms that you need. If it's an attorney that's staffing at the time that they're there, they can give you legal advice, which is protected by the attorney-client privilege. It's just a really good way to navigate the process if you haven't been through a court process before. And then there are a number of other resources in the community. I always refer to our offices as a community legal aid clinic. Our community just happens to be this campus. But there are other legal aid offices in each county in the state of Maryland. If you just Google free legal services or pro bono services in your county, some resources will come up. The Maryland Bar Association also does some clinics from time to time on landlord-tenant stuff or foreclosures. So, you have to be a little creative and willing to do a little research to find free services. Also, most attorneys everywhere will do a free consult. So you can call whatever attorney you're interested in meeting with and ask the office if they do free consults, which is, it's a brief meeting, but in that meeting, they will hear about your case. They will tell you what your options are and sort of what they think they can do for you. And you can also ask them for a price quote at that meeting. Are they going to charge you by the hour? I always like a case approach. What would you charge me for the whole case? That way there's no hidden fees. They're not billing you for every 15 minutes of their time. It's a one-time fee that they're charging you to handle your case. That typically doesn't include appeals. So if you lose, they're going to charge you more money to help you with appeal. But that free consult, they'll be able to tell you what they're going to be able to provide for the price that they're quoting you. People always ask, is it worth getting a lawyer? Well, if there's jail time involved, that's always worth a lawyer. If you're going to have employment consequences or possible citizenship or immigration status consequences, anything that is going to be a serious implication for you in your life, it's always a cost benefit analysis. So I have a lot of students who come in here with landlord tenant cases, and they want their security deposit back, and they want to get out of a lease or what have you. You got to weigh, how much am I going to have to pay a private attorney to do that for me? In most cases, it's going to exceed the cost of the security deposit that you're trying to get back. So always start with those free resources. And then if you have to go to a private attorney, try to start with that free consult so you know exactly what you're getting into. But sometimes an attorney is not worth the money, but if you can afford it, and it's a serious case, it's almost always worth the money. So, you know, neither Zach or I have a problem if you shoot us an email and you've just graduated and said, hey, I'm in this predicament, can you recommend someone? We're always happy to refer you out to whatever pro bono services we know are active and or private attorneys. And you can negotiate with attorneys. I think a lot of people think, oh, it's a set price. He or she said they're going to charge me $2,000 for this case. It's a business. It's a negotiation. You can go back and say, hey, I can't afford it at that price point, but could you do it for $1,500? And they may say yes. If you don't ask, you don't know. So those are a couple of thoughts I have. I don't know if you want to add anything, Zach.
Well, I think that was really thorough. And I think that it's just about, if you're having difficulty finding the right person or the right organization, send us an email, because we might be able to put you in contact with an organization you weren't able to find. And there are a lot of limitations, and like, I can tell you that DC has more resources than Maryland, and it's sometimes there are some gaps, but we can do our best to let you know if there's anything that you've missed when it comes to finding representation for civil issues, like the landlord tenant stuff. But yeah, in criminal, it really comes down to either the public defender's office or hiring a private attorney. And I think that the answer to that question, whether you should hire a private attorney, I mean, if you can qualify for the PD, definitely do it. If you, the question as to whether you should hire a private attorney, I think depends on the severity of the crime, your financial circumstances, and sort of the availability of the private attorneys that you've had. But we can both, whether you're an undergrad or a graduate student, Syndy and I can give you tips on how to screen attorneys, how to find an attorney that would be right for you, and sort of the ways to look for that.
And I think we have one more remaining question in the chat. Notice, everybody, that Debbie's put a lot of good, really good resources in there for, there's a website which is sort of a conglomeration of all of Maryland laws. It's called the People's Law Library. That's the first link that she put in there. That's a good place just to go for any questions about Maryland law. They have a really good FAQ set up, and so that's a great site. Maryland Court Help, how to get the help in the courthouses that I talked about earlier. And there's also a lot of guides for how to enforce a judgment, and just a lot of stuff for citizens who want to represent themselves in their own process. Those are great resources. And then Maryland Legal Aid is what I mentioned before. Those are the legal aid offices throughout the state. Just like public defenders, they're very, very busy. They'll do the best that they can to help you. A lot of them also have attorney referral lists who have volunteered to do things, sometimes not for free, but at a reduced rate, which is also, very helpful. They'll bring down your rates a little bit. So those are great resources. And then I think Laura had the last question we haven't answered. How can autistic people protect ourselves? Some of the most common autistic traits are the traits that cops are trained to recognize as suspicious. Examples are lack of eye contact, unusual clothes, etc. So Zach has posted a really good resource at the end of the chat with additional tips on interactions for those on the spectrum. I would say that a lot of times that will come into play after the fact. It will be something we call mitigating circumstances. So when you're trying to explain to a judge why you behave the way that you did, if that is based on a disability, that's compelling. The judge is going to understand why you reacted that way or failed to react in a way that the officer would expect or direct. So I think it's partly that, or mostly that. But also, if you're comfortable, there is no reason you can't share that information with the officer. And they do have trainings, much more than they used to, about how to be sensitive to circumstances that the person they're pulling over or are detaining might have, including disabilities. So sometimes that's uncomfortable to share, and you don't have to do that. It can be handled afterwards, but those would be sort of my first two initial reactions. But that's a great resource that Zach just posted there.
Yeah, and I agree completely. And that's something, it's always a personal decision as to whether or not you want to disclose a medical condition with an officer, but it is something that you could do and I think that in looking at the resource, one of the things that they reiterated, it was something that we mentioned a little bit earlier on, is that if you are struggling to understand what the officer is asking you to do, it's okay to say that, to say, I don't understand. Could you repeat that? Those things are perfectly reasonable statements to make. And say, you can also make statements if you don't believe that, or if you're having concerns about the officer's perception of the event, saying, I'm trying to cooperate. I would like to fulfill your request, things like that. I'm trying to cooperate, but I don't understand exactly what you're asking. Those sorts of things can be helpful in the moment to hopefully make sure that it stays at a low tension level. I mean, obviously there's going to be tons of stress and tons of emotion that are involved in an interaction with police, and knowing some of the horrific stories that made national headlines about police interacting with those that have an autism spectrum disorder. It's really just about trying your best in the moment to sort of say, I'm trying to help, I'm trying to do my best, I'm trying to cooperate, but then also don't hesitate to ask for further clarification or for them to repeat a question if it wasn't clear.
All right, it looks like that's it for the questions. Syndy, Zach, thank you so much for your guidance and your advice. I think you've done a terrific job of preparing folks for a police encounter that hopefully never happens, but it's good to be prepared. So thank you so much for your time and experience. And thank you to everyone who joined us in our Zoom room, and to those who are watching the recording. Please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation. We really need to hear from you, and watch out for our briefing newsletter. We'll be sharing legal information, and we'll be sharing our next spring's workshop schedule in several weeks. So until then, take care, enjoy the holidays, and let us know if you need our help. Thank you.